The hills of Provence stretched like green waves beneath a sapphire sky, the vineyard sloping down in neat rows of summer-rich vines. The sun cast long shadows across the land, and the scent of lavender drifted lazily on the wind. In the manor overlooking it all, Lucien stood on the balcony, glass of red wine in hand, watching workers in the fields below. He hadn't returned as a beggar. Not here. Here, he was just a name no one used, a quiet investor, a man who had bought the land under a different life and let it flourish without attaching ego or legacy. It was the only place that still whispered to the boy he once was. But the past was not so easily buried. The morning air shifted. A soft purr of an engine broke the calm. Lucien didn't turn his head. He already knew. He sipped the wine, slow and deliberate, as if bracing himself. Elise stepped out of the sleek car, her heels clicking on the stone drive like the ticking of a long-ignored clock. She was dressed simply. No pearls, no entourage, no statement. Just herself, bare and burning. He didn't greet her. He didn't move. "You didn't hide very well," she said from behind him. Lucien smiled faintly. "Didn't intend to." She came to stand beside him, gazing out at the vines. "I thought you wanted nothing more to do with us. With me." "I didn't," he said. "But this land, it was my mother's favorite. And it was rotting under your family's hand." "You saved it?" she asked. "I freed it," he corrected. "There's a difference." She looked down into her own hands, pale and unsure. "So that's what you do now? Rescue things and walk away?" Lucien finally turned to her. There was something unreadable in his gaze, something neither cold nor kind. "I didn't walk away from you. I walked away from what they made us." She met his eyes. "What if I want something real now?" He paused. "Do you even know what real means, Elise? I know it doesn't live in glass towers or diamond contracts." Her voice trembled. "I know it smells like earth and old stone and regret. I know it looks like a man who should hate me but still pulled me from a burning car." Lucien stared at her. His silence 1,000 conversations never had. "I came to find you," she said, softer now. "Not to revive something broken. Just to ask you who you are now. Without the war between our families. Without the lies." He took a breath, deep and quiet. "I don't know yet." She nodded, a small gesture heavy with understanding. "Then maybe I'll stay. Just for a while. Help with the harvest." A small, unexpected laugh escaped him. "You've never worked a day in your life." "I'm willing to try," she said, eyes steady. "If you let me." The wind picked up. A hawk circled high above the vines. Below, the workers sang softly in Provençal. Their voices carried across the hills like an ancient lullaby. Lucien turned back to the vineyard. "Then start at dawn," he said. She smiled. "I will." And for the first time in years, Lucien felt the past loosen its grip. Not vanished, not forgiven, but perhaps at last beginning to fade. The sun dipped toward the horizon, staining the sky with wine-colored gold, and in the silence between two broken people, something fragile began to grow. "Shall I continue from here?" The following morning broke with a hush, as though even the sun dared not speak too loudly. Mist clung to the vineyard like a secret, and the dew shimmered across the grape leaves. Elise arrived barefoot, her shoes hanging from one hand, her breath clouding softly in the chill. She looked uncertain, as though she expected someone to laugh at her for being there. But no one did. Lucien watched her from the slope above, a basket already slung over his shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes tracked her every step as she came to stand beside him, silent, waiting. He handed her a small blade and a pair of gloves. "Don't cut the stem too close," he said. "You'll shock the vine." She nodded and followed him into the rows. For a long time neither spoke. The only sound was the soft snip of blades, the rustle of leaves, the occasional whisper of wind. Lucien moved with ease, his hands practiced, sure. Elise stumbled once, twice, her fingers clumsy. But she didn't complain. She just watched him, mimicked him, learned. At midday, they rested under an old olive tree. Lucian handed her a flask of water, and she took it without hesitation. They sat in silence, the world wrapped in birdsong and the hum of bees. "You were never meant to be like them," he said quietly. She glanced at him, surprised. "Like my family." He nodded. "You were kind once. Remember? When we were children. You gave me your scarf the day my father died. No one else even looked at me." "I remember," she said. "You didn't cry." "I couldn't afford to," he replied. "I knew then I had no place in your world." She looked down, twisting the flask in her hands. "Neither do I anymore. After the accident I realized I didn't know anyone around me. They knew my name, not my soul. I was a symbol, not a person." Lucian watched her for a long time. "And now? I don't want to be a symbol," she said. "I don't want legacy or fortune. I want to learn who I am when everything is stripped away." He leaned back against the tree, eyes half closed. "That takes time." "I have time," she said. "If you'll let me stay." He didn't answer, but he didn't say no either. Over the next few weeks, she worked alongside the others. Her hands blistered, her skin darkened under the sun, and the fine clothes she once wore were replaced with linen and dust. She laughed for the first time in years, real laughter, loud and unguarded, and Lucian, despite himself, began to laugh too. They spoke in pieces, like slowly fitting together a long-lost mosaic. Sometimes they argued, quietly but with heat. She was still fire, still willful. He was still guarded, wary of letting anyone too close. But things shifted. One evening, as they pressed grapes in the cellar, her hands sticky with juice, she looked at him and asked, "Do you think we could have been something if things had been different?" He paused, then shook his head. "We were something. Just not what they told us to be." She nodded slowly. "And now?" Lucian turned to her, brushing a smear of juice from her cheek. His touch lingered a second longer than necessary. "Now, I don't know. But I'm not afraid to find out." Outside, the moon rose over the vineyard like a silver promise. The past was still there, always would be, but in the quiet hours of grape and soil, of broken hearts learning how to mend, something unnamed and new began to bloom. Autumn slid in gently, like a whisper of something ending, but not lost. The vines turned amber and rust, shedding their leaves as if sighing with relief after bearing their burden. The vineyard softened in the light, no longer a place of labor but one of reflection. The harvest was done, the wine resting in barrels beneath cool stone. Life slowed, and Lucian, for the first time in years, felt the slowing in his bones, not as dread but as peace. Lee stayed. Not as a guest, not as an heiress, not as a woman seeking redemption, but as herself. She took on chores without being asked, read in the quiet corners of the cellar, helped in the kitchen when the wind rose cold. The workers, skeptical at first, began nodding to her with respect. She never asked for approval, and somehow that earned it more deeply than if she had. One evening, the wind howled through the shutters, and rain lashed at the windows in fits of anger. Lucian stood near the hearth, feeding the fire with dry wood. Elise entered the room, wrapped in a blanket, her hair damp from the run between the cottage and the manor. "There's a leak in the barn roof," she said, half laughing. "I tried to cover it with a tarp, but I think I ended up wetter than the hay." He glanced at her, amused. "You never did know when to give up." "I never wanted to," she said, her voice softer now. He gestured toward the fire. "Come here. You're shivering." She sat beside him, the heat enveloping them both, the silence between them comfortable now. The storm battered the world outside, but inside the room was still, held together by a kind of quiet tether. Neither of them spoke aloud. After a long while she said, "There's something I haven't told you." Lucian turned his head slightly, waiting. "The engagement. Fought it. Back then. I begged him not to force it. But I was just a daughter, and daughters weren't meant to have opinions." He said nothing, but his eyes darkened, not with anger but with understanding. "I thought you hated me for going along with it," she continued. But I wasn't strong enough to leave like you did. I was scared of losing everything. You didn't lose everything, Lucien said. You found yourself. She looked at him, eyes shining from the firelight. And I found you. Those words sat between them like a flame neither dared to touch. I don't want to rewrite the past, she said. But I want to choose what comes next. And I want to choose it with you. Lucien stared into the fire, as if it might offer an answer. Then he turned to her, slowly, deliberately. Then stay, he said. I already did. And when he reached for her hand, there was no trembling, no hesitation. Only warmth. Real. Steady. True. Outside, the storm began to die. The clouds parted, revealing a thin sliver of moonlight, soft and silver on the wet earth. In the vineyard, the vines slept, dreaming of spring. And inside, two souls long unraveled finally began to thread themselves together. One glance, one touch, one honest word at a time. Would you like the story to move forward from here, maybe into winter, or explore the conflict if the outside world tries to pull them apart again? Winter arrived like a sigh held too long, exhaled across the valley in breaths of frost and hush. The vineyard slumbered beneath a blanket of snow, the vines stripped bare, their twisted limbs reaching for a sun that now rose late and without warmth. Days passed slowly. The kind of slow that lets silence fill rooms without unease. Lucien and Elise lived in that quiet rhythm, two people no longer circling pain but sharing its stillness. They woke early, not to work but to tend to smaller things. Repairs, letters, books half-read beside cups of bitter coffee. Sometimes they sat by the fire and said nothing for hours. And it was enough. But peace never lives untouched for long. One morning, as the world beyond the window shimmered with frost, a sleek black car arrived. No announcement, no invitation. The kind of car that doesn't belong in a village like this. Its presence was like oil on water, unnatural, sharp, invasive. Lucien stepped out into the cold, scarf tied around his neck, boots crunching through the snow. Elise stood at the door behind him, her fingers pressed against the wooden frame. The driver didn't speak, just opened the rear door. From it emerged a man with gray hair and ice in his eyes. Henri Moreau, her father. Lucien, he said, as if tasting something sour. Still playing the peasant, I see. Lucien's jaw tightened. What do you want? Henry's gaze flicked to his daughter, then back. You've had your time in the shadows. I'm here for her. This has gone on long enough. She's not yours to collect, Lucien said. She is mine, Henri growled, stepping forward. She is a Moreau. And she will return to Paris, where she belongs. To the board. To the company. To the life she was bred for. Elise's voice cut through the frost like a blade. I don't belong to you. Her father turned slowly. You think this is real? He asked, gesturing around. This fantasy. This farce. You're living on borrowed time and stolen land. Lucien stepped between them. I bought this land. With what? Pity. Or her money. My money, Elise said, voice rising. You think I came here out of rebellion? I came because for once I wanted to decide something for myself. And I did. I chose this. Henry's face twisted into something unreadable. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Something worse. Disappointment. You are your mother's daughter, he said like a curse. Lucien took a step forward. You've said what you came to say. Henri looked at him, and for a moment, there was something human in his eyes. This won't last, he said quietly. The world will come knocking. And she's not built for hunger and dirt and heartbreak. When it comes, remember this moment. Then he turned, got into his car, and disappeared into the snow. They didn't speak for a long time after. That night, they sat by the fire again, the storm now not outside, but between them. He's right, you know, Elise whispered. I wasn't built for this. Lucien looked at her carefully. You built yourself into it. She leaned her head against his shoulder. What if I'm not strong enough when the world comes knocking? Then we open the door together, he said. And that was all. Outside the snow fell quietly. Not as threat, not as warning. Just snow, soft, indifferent and inevitable. Inside they held each other in the flickering light, two people against a storm, waiting not for peace, but for whatever would come next, together. The days that followed were touched with a new weight, subtle but present, like the stillness of air before a shift in weather. Henri Moreau's visit had left something behind, not in words but in silence. Elise moved more slowly through the manor. Lucien noticed the way she paused at the window, the way her eyes followed the path where the black car had driven away. He didn't ask. She didn't speak of it. But in the evenings, she still came to sit beside him by the fire. And that was enough for now. One morning, while trimming dead wood from the vines, Lucien found her in the library. The fire was out. Papers were scattered across the floor. Her hands were in her lap, still clenched too tightly. He crouched beside her. "What is it?" She didn't look at him right away. When she finally did, there was something fierce and fragile in her face. "He froze my accounts. All of them." Lucien didn't flinch. "He wants to pull you back. He thinks without money I'll fold. That I'll crawl home and beg." Lucien stood slowly. "Then we let him believe that." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "Let him think he's won. Let the world believe you're finished. And in that silence you rebuild something of your own. Not with what he gave you. With what you earn. What you are." She looked at him, eyes wide. "And how do I start with nothing?" "You start the way all real things begin," he said. "Small, quiet, honest." And so they did. Word spread, as it always does in small towns, that the girl from the city, the one with silk in her voice and diamonds in her bones, had been left with nothing. And yet she remained. She worked. She learned. Not just from Lucien but from the soil, from the seasons, from failure. Lucien began teaching her how to blend the wines. How to listen with her tongue, not just her ears. She took notes, asked questions, made mistakes. He scolded her once for bottling too soon. She snapped at him when he called her impatient. But the tension never lasted long. One night, after a long day of barreling, she brought out an old label design she had drawn by candlelight. Simple, elegant, hand-lettered. The name wasn't hers. Or his. It was a word neither of them had spoken since the beginning. Ovi. Save. He looked at it long and hard, then finally said, "It's good. I want this to be ours," she said, almost afraid of the words. "It already is." Winter melted at the edges. The snow turned to mud. Buds began to appear on the vines like promises whispered in sleep. Life, as it always does, began again. And then one morning, as the spring wind carried warmth into the stone corridors of the old manor, a letter arrived. Thick paper. Embossed seal. Lucien didn't need to open it to know what it was. "From Paris?" Elise asked. He nodded. "From your father's legal team." She held out her hand. "Let me see it." He gave it to her. She read silently, her face still, unreadable. When she reached the end, she set it on the table and lit a match. Lucien raised a brow. "That's one way to answer." Her voice was calm. "He's suing me. For defamation of legacy. For breach of family contract. He thinks if he drags me through court I'll disappear. That I'll give up and vanish. And will you?" She looked at him, firelight in her eyes. "I'm done vanishing." He smiled, slow, proud, something deeper than approval. "Then let's fight. Not with armies. Not with power. With truth. Or vines. With wine that bore her spirit and his defiance. Bottled in silence and pressed in hope." The first batch of Sauvy was bottled on a quiet morning in early May. There were no press releases, no grand unveilings, no glittering guest lists. Just Elise and Lucien in the cellar, hands stained with labor, corking each bottle with the weight of everything they had endured. Each bottle was marked with a simple label she had designed. Hand-lettered, no title, no estate name. Just Sauvy, beneath a line drawing of a single vine breaking through cracked stone. It said everything they couldn't. The first crate was sent to a small wine bar in Marseille, a place Lucien knew, where the owner owed him nothing but had always trusted his taste. A second went to a sommelier in Lyon. No fanfare, no demands, just wine. Honest, defiant and alive. And then, as if pulled by a tide they hadn't dared to hope for, something shifted. A blogger in Bordeaux wrote about it. Just a few lines. Asterisk, a quiet triumph. A wine that tastes like someone refused to break. Asterisk. That was enough. Calls began to trickle in. Then orders. Small ones. Select. The kind of people who understood stories that weren't loud. Who craved something that couldn't be bought with status or history. And then Paris called. Not the father but the press. An editor from Le Gout Authentique, a quiet but influential voice in the wine world, requested an interview. Elise refused at first. Lucien let her. But 3 days later she changed her mind. Let them hear it from me, she said. Not from the lawyers. Not from the bloodlines. From the woman who survived the fire. They met the editor in the vineyard, under a sky heavy with spring rain. No makeup. No handlers. Just Elise in boots and a wool sweater, her hands rough, her voice steady. She told him everything. Not with drama or vengeance, but with calm precision. The engagement she never chose, the car crash, the months of silence and soil, the man who saved her not with rescue, but with truth. And she spoke of Sauvy. How it wasn't just a wine, but a reclamation. The article went viral. Not in the way fashion or scandal did, but in quiet waves, among people tired of noise. Among those who understood what it meant to fall apart and choose to build again anyway. Henry's legal team sent another letter. This one was different. Short. Bitter. A cease and desist. Claiming she had no right to profit from the family legacy. That Sauvy was a stain on the Moreau name. Lucien laughed when he read it. If that's what he thinks, we're doing something right. But Elise didn't laugh. She stood still for a long time, then looked up at him. I want to go to Paris, she said. Lucien's expression hardened. You don't owe him anything. It's not about him, she said. It's about the part of me I left there. The girl I was. I need to look her in the eye before I let her go. And so they went. Not in disguise. Not in defiance. But in truth. They arrived at the Moreau estate under a sky sharp with sunlight. Elise walked through the iron gates she once passed in fear, now with quiet resolve. Henri waited in the drawing room, flanked by lawyers, pride wound tight like a blade. She didn't flinch. I'm not here to beg, she said. I'm here to tell you I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry your cruelty any longer. He stared at her. You think this absolves you? No, she said. But it frees me. She turned and walked out without another word. Outside Lucien was waiting. She met his eyes and exhaled. Are you done? He asked. I am now. They drove away from Paris under a sky blooming with dusk. As the city faded behind them, so did the last remnants of chains she hadn't realized she was still dragging. Back in the vineyard, a new label had arrived. Their second vintage. She opened the crate, lifted the first bottle. This one bore a new name. Récolte. Harvest. For what comes after survival. Summer ripened slowly, with golden mornings and long humming twilights. The vines had grown thick and tangled with green, heavy with fruit not yet ready to let go. There was a kind of sacred quiet in the land, like it had been holding its breath for too long and was finally ready to exhale. Lucien stood at the edge of the vineyard, hands in his pockets, watching the rose sway in the warm breeze. Behind him, laughter floated from the old stone house. Elise was somewhere in the kitchen, barefoot, hair pinned up, humming an old tune she'd picked up from one of the harvesters. The notes were soft but sure. Her voice had changed, he realized. Not in pitch but in weight. She no longer sang like she was asking permission. He walked back slowly, dust rising in puffs beneath his boots. The door was open. Table set. A bottle of Récolte uncorked. 2 glasses. Bread and figs. No grand feast. Just enough. Always just enough. She turned when she saw him, wiping flour from her hands. You were out there a long time. He nodded. The vines look good. They trust you, she said. He smiled faintly. It's mutual. Ian raised a brow. Everything I touched, my family, my reputation, even you, it all broke. She ran a finger along the rim of her glass. But maybe things didn't break. Maybe they just needed to fall apart before I could see them clearly. He didn't speak, just reached across the table and took her hand. She looked out the window. I don't want anything more than this. You already have it. And it was true. There were no headlines anymore. No lawsuits. No limelight. Paris had moved on as it always did. The world spun on. But out here, in this quiet corner of the earth, something had taken root. Not just vines, not just wine, but love. A love that had no need for declarations or promises. It had already been proven in the silence, in the survival, in the choosing. They finished their wine as the last of the sun dipped behind the hills. The vineyard swayed like a sea, glowing gold in the dark. And in that soft final light, everything was still. Not perfect, but finally whole.